Final Fight for Super Nintendo, released in 1990, is a conversion of the famous Capcom arcade, one of the most influential beat 'em ups of the late 80s. Set in the fictional metropolis of Metro City, the game follows Mayor Mike Hager, Street Fighter Cody Travers and Ninja Guy against the Mad Gear Gang to rescue Jessica, Hager's kidnapped daughter. The SNES port maintains the visual style of the arcade original, with large and detailed sprites, especially for the main characters and bosses. The animations, while not particularly fluid by modern standards, are well done for the time, with movements that give a sense of weight and impact to the shots. The settings range from seedy alleys to construction sites and abandoned factories, with good use of colors to represent the urban decadence of Metro City. However, the memory limitation of the Super Nintendo led to the reduction of the number of enemies on the screen at the same time, with a maximum of 3 at a time, compared to 5 or 6 units in the arcade version. The gameplay is a classic example of side-scrolling beat 'em up. The player traverses various linear levels, fighting waves of enemies with melee attacks, jumps, and special moves. Each character has its own set of moves and characteristics. Hager is the most powerful but also the slowest, with devastating wrestling moves like the piledriver. Cody is a balanced fighter, with speed and moderate strength, with the ability to use knives and other objects. Guy, absent in the original SNES version but reintroduced in a later version, Final Fight Guy, is the fastest and most agile, but with lower attack power. Each level ends with a boss fight, each featuring specific attack patterns that require different tactics to defeat. Combat is based on a simple system of basic attacks, combos, grabs and special attacks, which can be achieved by simultaneously pressing the attack button and the jump button, which consume part of the player's life bar. One of the most iconic elements of the gameplay is the presence of weapons scattered throughout the levels, such as knives, pipes and swords, which the player can pick up and use against enemies, adding variety to the game mechanics. Due to the hardware limitations of the Super Nintendo, the SNES version has some significant differences from the arcade original. Absence of cooperative mode, the SNES version is for a single player, eliminating one of the key elements that made the game famous in the arcade, namely the possibility of facing hordes of enemies in the company of a friend. Lack of Guy, the original SNES version does not include Guy as a playable character, although a second version, Final Fight Guy, reintroduces him but eliminates Cody. Reduction of on-screen enemies, the number of enemies displayed at once has been reduced compared to the arcade version, limiting the complexity and difficulty of the game. The soundtrack of Final Fight on SNES, composed of songs full of rhythm and tension, contributes to increasing the atmosphere of danger and adrenaline. The musical themes are adaptations of the original arcade tracks, mixing rock and synth elements characteristic of the 80s. The sound effects, although simple, are also satisfying, with sounds of punches and screams amplifying the sensation of impact during combat. With just 6 levels, the game can be completed in about an hour, but its difficulty and level design offer a significant challenge, especially for less experienced players. The lack of additional or multiplayer modes reduces the overall longevity compared to other titles, but the variety between the playable characters and their different fighting styles can make you want to replay it several times.
Final Fight for Super Nintendo is an explosion of fists and adrenaline, where the streets of the metropolis of Metro City become a relentless battle arena. It's a work of pixel art that captures the brutality and dark allure of urban combat, where every blow delivered seems to carve the asphalt. As Hager, Cody, or Guy, players battle not just enemies, but corruption itself, advancing through the slums in a desperate race to save Mayor Hager's daughter Jessica. The streets are a kaleidoscope of dangers, between criminal gangs that seem to emerge from a cyberpunk nightmare and titanic bosses who embody urban fury. The soundtrack is a pulsating mix of synths, perfect to accompany your thirst for justice. Each level is an action story, a dynamic narrative where the devastating moves of the protagonists rewrite the fate of the city with the frenetic pace of violence that acts as the only language. And even though the SNES version lacks multiplayer, the intensity of the solo combat makes you feel like the hero of an 80s action movie, relentless and unstoppable. Despite the limitations imposed by the platform, Final Fight for Super Nintendo remains an iconic title in the beat-em-up scene of the 90s. Its simple structure, captivating visual design and memorable characters have left an indelible mark on the history of the genre. While it may not completely replicate the arcade experience, it is still a milestone that marked the genre's transition from arcades to home consoles.